One thing that I've noticed during the pandemic is that many people seem to be feeling a bit of relief from the idea of illness. And this is not at all to say that people hope that other people get sick and die, or that people really enjoy the feeling of fear and the propagation of fear and the environment of fear, nor is it to discount that illness is a very real thing and that people are very much scared of it, and that fear is valid for many people. So this conversation isn't to discount any of those things, nor is it to suggest that a fantasy of illness is negative. I think that oftentimes in this society, we're so accustomed to juxtaposing things as positive or negative. Our society, our life, our existence is one of binaries and polarities and opposites and oppositions. So I think that it's really important before I start out to note that what I'm speaking of here is a deeper kind of soul longing that I wanted to unpack, rather than an accusation or a larger condemnation of this thing that I've been noticing happening in our society. I'm going to call it a fantasy of illness. And I think it's propagated by a inner desire, a subconscious desire to have other people relate to you through a language of illness, through an experience of illness. I've been noticing this so much during the pandemic, that people seem a bit relieved. Of course, they're scared, and of course, they're feeling angry and they're feeling confused. I'm speaking for myself as well, absolutely. But there's also a kind of lightening for those people that have identified themselves through a language of illness for their whole lives, whether that means that they've struggled with immense emotional trauma, autoimmune disorders, asthma, or ADHD. There's a panoply along a spectrum of how people identify who they are through a discourse of illness. For some people, that has served them. I mean, I think certainly it isn't all necessarily a bad thing, especially if you can feel empowered through your ability to heal and move forward. There are lots of different discourses that surround a language of illness. But there's also a discourse, I think, in which people begin to feel like they are their illness. And there's almost, when that happens, a longing emerges to see others really be able to acknowledge that struggle inside of themselves, right? When it comes to envisioning an ideal world, we all have the ideals that we think about, that we conjure in our minds, but we also have those ideals that are made manifest through our fears and through our own personal associations that might be more unconscious for us. I feel like during the pandemic, these subconscious desires are really manifesting. What I'm noticing, and I don't know if you notice this too, is that there seems to be a big heave of relief, a sigh of relief, in that the environment, the climate of our society currently is really reflecting the fantasy of illness that has been propagated by so many people in their individual lives. People are actually feeling as if they're being seen for the first time. Almost like what they believed was going to happen all along is actually coming true, and that justifies them a lot in their own fear of their own bodies, their own fear of their own decisions, their fear of death. All of these fears, again, people decide for themselves what's valid and what works for them. It's not to demonize that. It's not to place it in a negative light. That's really important. But it just is an observation to say that this fantasy that's being propagated, a world of fear around death, illness, dying, the unknown, a lack of control, is rampant right now in this society, and it's shaping the society in a really distinctive way in the moment. And that is suitable, I feel, for so many people right now. It's an interesting thought to think because I'm seeing it in my neighbors, my friends, and of course I'm seeing it in myself, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to acknowledge that, right? It's a sensation that I feel in myself. It's this gravitation toward, a pull to nestle down into fear and to feel like finally you're being seen, right? That all the things that you struggle with is suddenly painted on the town and everybody's wearing it, right? And so you feel like you can nestle down into that in a way. And of course, there's two sides, right? Some of that is really off-putting and it intensifies the fear and it makes things more difficult. But there's another piece of this, I think, too, where it feels like home. It feels like, finally, people are actually feeling like they need to protect themselves and hunker down into a fear of death, look at the darkness, really take inventory of their own illnesses and their own vulnerabilities, for good, for better or worse. So I think when we think about the psychology of the pandemic, it's important to acknowledge this fantasy of illness, where what we're putting out is being reflected back to us. And it becomes a question then of what we want to do with that reflection. Do we like it? Do we want to transform it? Right? Do we want to move beyond it? Do we want to move deeper into it? Do we like the kind of society that's coming together through a fantasy of illness? What are the potential? What is the potentiality of moving into a space where the fantasy of illness is really revving up? When I say fantasy, again, I'm not saying that it's imaginary. I think there's a real distinction that needs to be made there. I like to use the word fantasy to signal that there's a certain desire. There's a desire involved that becomes manifest. And I think that is what's happening a lot right now in the way that the projection of illness is unfolding. I would love to know your thoughts about your own desires for illness, your own fantasies of illness in the world that you live in your own life, and how that's manifested for you and how it's manifesting now during this pandemic. Thanks for watching.